look like. And then we're going to have a couple hands-on activities, depending on the number of people that end up showing up. We're going to either break up into 2 groups and use a mapping program, or we may stay one group depending on what it looks like as we get towards that end. So we do have 2 objectives today, and that's first to understand, why redistricting. We understand that it does cause stress in the community when people think about going to a different elementary school, or the reasons why they may have to shift, or different things. And we want to make sure that we're kind of prepared for the future. After we get out of the pandemic, we know Franklin's a growing place. We also know that there's some requirements that are put on us by the federal government that we need to make sure all those things match up. And so tonight, we're going to bring those all to a conversation. A couple of things about the meeting. One is, and thank you, Mrs. Betts. She just recorded, reminded everybody we are recording tonight's session. So if anybody misses it, they can come back and catch it again. If you don't want to have your camera on, that's fine. You can just shut the video off and listen. We will, when we do break up, if we go small group, though, we will need cameras on as we have conversations and kind of thumbs up. Also, if you're new to Google and Google Meets, if you move your cursor over so the bottom bar comes up, you'll notice a new little feature that says raise hand. And if you have a question tonight and you have something you want to ponder, just click that raised hand like I did on mine. You'll see a little hand will pop up, and then we'll stop and call on you. Please, throughout the night, if there are questions about anything that you hear, because we're going to have different presenters, please ask us to pause, ask us to clarify, follow up with a different question. And, we want to make sure this is informative for everybody. And we get to the final objective, and that is to kind of redraw some of the boundaries with some of the parameters that are before us. And these are just draft. We'll take them back and put the final touches on them. We'll bring them back to another meeting on, I think it's January the 6th is what we're looking at right now. And then again on January 27th to finalize that, and then putting the beginning elements on the entire document of what does grad pathways look like, middle school concept, and CBIS, as well as redistricting, and a lot of other things underneath each of those inside the domain of instruction, and also in curriculum and social emotional learning and different aspects like that. So with that, I just want to welcome everybody. We have 32 people that are joining us, and I really appreciate you giving up Thursday night at 6:30 to help our district get better and help us make good decisions for the short term and the long term. And so with that, Jeff, good, next slide, please. All right, there are going to be 3 big areas as we talk about why. The first one is ESSA, which is Every Student Succeed Act. And that is part of the federal requirements and transparency, as well as accountability. And we have some requirements that are before us that our CFO, Mrs. Gross, and Dr. Warland will talk a little bit about in terms of what that means for us and how did we get here to the transparency portion that the state and government require. And then we're going to talk about boundaries. What are the present boundaries? Mr. Dickinson is with us tonight. He's going to talk a little bit about bus routing and how we pick kids up and some of the decisions that are made, and especially as we start looking at some of the Creekside boundaries, because we have several of those neighborhoods from Cumberland Trace up to Simon Farms that are kind of smushed all together. And those are great, but they also cause some stress because some should go to Northwood, some should go to Creekside. And what does that look like for us? And then they will wrap up in a program called 5 Maps, where Matt is the expert of this for our team, and he helps us kind of create the structures that we want inside of the boundaries and look at what we're going to maybe think about doing. Inside of the journey ahead, you're also going to get to see some of the housing developments that are proposed. Mr. Sewell's worked with the city planning as well as kind of creating some structures through Google Maps to show us what those look like and some of the projected number of homes that could go in many of those areas. So we tried to have as much information tonight that would provide us some answers on how can we create solid boundaries to allow growth and allow us to meet the requirements of ESSA. And so with that, next slide, please. I'm going to send it over to Mrs. Gross, and she's going to begin talking about ESSA.
Okay, so the state and federal governments are both watching our per pupil cost. Everybody wants to make sure that we don't invest too much money in one building or one group of students and neglect another. So the Every Student Succeeds Act requires that all states report a per pupil cost. This information is provided to the public out on the state platform called Gateway. And they just want to make sure that our funding is being distributed in an equitable manner. So the per pupil cost per building must be within 30% of the state average. And this is at the state level. Next slide, Mr. Sewell. So this is our per pupil cost for 1920. So on the lower end, you see Creekside at about $8,400 per student. And then on the high end, you see a per pupil cost for Union of about $10,800. Okay. So next slide. So again, the estimated average for Indiana is about $9,500 per student. That is a guess on my part because that hasn't actually been publicized yet, but last year is about $9,100. So, and then a 30% range results in the $6,650 to $12,350. So all of our buildings fall within that range. So we're definitely in compliance with that state standard. Next slide. But on the federal side, there's a different calculation, same concept and everything. They're looking at a per pupil cost, but it only takes into consideration instructional salaries and supplies. No operating and building costs are included in that calculation. And it's a lot more stringent in that it must be within 10% of the average pupil cost for the 5 buildings that receive federal funding, title funding. So for us, next slide, please. This is what that looks like. We receive federal funding, title funding in these 5 buildings. And so our average cost using that calculation per pupil is about $3,400. A 10% range gives a minimum of $3,076 and a maximum of $3,759. And for the 1920 school year, Union fell outside of that at a per pupil cost of $4,251. So having said that, we did make some changes for this school year, the 2021 school year. We had a Union teacher retire that had been there for many years. So she was at the higher range of the salary scale. So we replaced her with a new teacher that didn't cost as much. And so that coupled with transferring another teacher from Union to Custer Baker brought us back within that required So 19 or 2021 should be okay. But I guess the point of all this is if we don't get an increased enrollment in Union, we're going to have to make these type of changes every year. So I think one of the objectives is to increase our enrollment at Union, and that will drive our per pupil costs down.
Mrs. Gross, Laura Alexander had a really good question. Can we explain just briefly why is Union the highest per pupil?
Well, we have 127 students there, and it's an older building, so utilities and things like that. It's just a more cost to operate an older building like that.
The denominator, you're going to find out throughout this journey, the denominator really impacts the per pupil cost for kids. So that 127 kids or 130 kids really plays a big part. And that's why Creekside has the lowest at the elementary level. They just have so many more students in that.
Yeah, we only have one, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have one teacher per grade level at Union. So it's not overstaffed or anything like that. It's just we need more students in that building.
I would also say that when we asked the state expert about Title I and buildings being too high or too low, their answer is just take the highest staff members completely out of the building and let it be filled with brand new teachers. And the concept that they've come up with out of the federal government side is that a lot of the Title I schools would always have the youngest teachers coming in and not staying very long and then moving on to a different school. So they made this one kind of blanket conversation point for everybody in the nation. So then they give it back to us and say, now you guys try to fix your problem. And so that's one of the things that's been before us.
Dr. Clendenning, did you or Jeff see the question from Barb?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is limited. Yep, it is limited based on the number of kids and adults because of the sewer.
The septic system capacity, and we just made a nice improvement to that, to refurbish that and kind of restore that capacity, so we feel like that building's in a good place. But at the maximum 200 students is all that building would handle.
Those are really good questions. And previous, I'll just do a little bit more background. We had this issue 2 years ago with Union, and at Northwood, we used to have the developmental delay preschool program as well as essential skills. So we ended up moving essential skills and the developmental delay program over to Creekside to try to help us with this issue with per pupil expenditure. And it did work for the year after we did it, but then you can see what happens the following year. It still continues to go up because teacher salaries go up and the populations of the schools vary. And so that's been an impact that we've had to continue with. And we want to try to stop that. We would like to see us, kind of stabilize some things in the district so that we can help make some both instructional and curricular decisions that we feel are best for kids. And that's having teachers have PLCs together and being able to have some stability inside of that. Won't that still leave us with inequitable funding? Can you talk a little bit more about your question, Barb?
I think she means because it's limited to a specific amount of number, will that continue to leave us inequitable?
Oh, I see what she's saying. We would like to get it down and adding those additional bodies that we have a few years of space between the ESSA issue. because just like anything else, a lot of things could change. But we just don't want to keep going every year and having to impact Union and Creekside as it is right now on that. So what we're trying to do is get some breathing room over the next several years with ESSA. But ultimately, Barb, you're correct. The 200 denominator will have an impact.
The next slide kind of shows some of those capacity figures. Is that a good next
That'd be great.
reference?
Go ahead, Mr. Sewell.
Want me to explain this one?
Yeah.
Yep. So in the green column there, we have our enrollment figures from 1920, which is obviously before the pandemic, when our more recent enrollment figures are a little bit more skewed by our students who are in virtual learning and so on. So we used, just for the purposes of this example, we went back and looked at 1920 school year, and you can see the enrollment compared to each building's capacity, and then what percentage of capacity each building is at. And you can see that Creekside is very full, at better than 91 or 90% capacity, and then the others are there's room in the others. Overall, if we were to balance our enrollment in each building, we would be at about 75% cumulative capacity across our elementary schools. There at the bottom, I added some scenarios. If we look towards the growth that we'll show you on some maps here in a second, the housing starts that are going up quickly in our community, and we start estimating how many students that may represent in additions to our enrollment. That gives you an idea of what impact that has on our capacity. So adding 300 students would bring us up to 87% capacity. At 400 students, we're up at 91, and 500 at 96. Based on the 1920 enrollment, 610 additional students above those numbers would bring us to 100% capacity.
One thing, Jeff, can you go back to that slide a second? If you look at Needham and Webb Elementary, as you know, they're actually on one piece of property for us. And when I arrived in 2009-10, we really started looking at those as one campus as we move kids back and forth to help with class size, to help with creating buildings that were somewhat similar. We have about 80 students right now at Webb Elementary that actually live in the boundaries of Needham. So you can see that if we would take out those 80 kids, Webb would be substantially smaller by those 80 kids, and add the 80 back to Needham, and you can see what happens to Needham Elementary. So we've tried to do some things on our own, kind of behind the scenes, that for lack of a better term, soft redistricting, where we did it on our own, and we informed parents why we had to do it, and we also took siblings with them to Webb from Needham Elementary. But we would like to, I think you're going to see there's a chance that we can do some things that we could eliminate some of that soft and actually create opportunities for us.
So preschool is a good question. We currently have 120 kids in preschool. They're spread into 3 separate buildings. There's a classroom at Webb and 1 at Union and 4 at Northwood for 120, approximately 120 enrollees there. So that does, obviously that gets us into a little bit, reduced capacity, kind of something more on the 87% if we consider our preschool. We're probably at about 87% or a little bit higher than that if we consider that preschool enrollment in the capacity figures. It's a good question. I saw a question about transfers related to environmental concerns out at Webb and Needham. I think it's important to remember, and there's a lot of confusion about this, the drinking water supplies at both schools and across the city. That's the same drinking water that all of us who are on Indiana American Water have plumbed to our homes is meeting all water quality standards and has. The item has not had exceedances of drinking water standards in those systems. So we are confident, and we have done some of our own testing in terms of participating in lead testing for lead that comes from plumbing fixtures, and we're in good shape in all of those areas. So we are confident and have done our due diligence to make sure our faculty and students are supplied with fresh water and that's clean and meeting all standards.
Yeah, and Laura, the question is, we still allow transfers. Dr. Warland is in charge of the intra-district transfers, and so she may have a better handle on the exact number, but we are allowing kids to move in and out of all buildings as long as there's capacity at the requested building and it's done in a timely manner. Dr. Warland, you want to say any more about that?
Sure. Thanks, Laura, for the question. Dr. Clendenning is exactly right. We would still honor those transfers. It is not uncommon for families, because of daycare in a certain area or family in a certain area for after school reasons, to request another building. So I anticipate that that will still be the case as we think about redistricting and what that looks like. So I'm trying to think through, Laura, that question you asked specifically, if I've had any specifically this year related to that issue. I don't recall any. Now it could be that, that other reasons are provided on the form. So to be fair, I don't have a sense of that, but we would still allow the redistricting or the transfers.
Next slide, please. Mr. Dickinson.
Okay, I just have a few items here to talk about on the transportation side of it. We have 58 morning routes and 81 afternoon routes, and the difference in those is that we bring K through 6 in on the same bus in the morning, and then in the afternoon 5, 6 goes home by themselves. That's why there's a difference. That's the lion's share of that right there. Current ride time is between 30 and 78 minutes. Our district, one of the difficult things about it is that it's 112 square miles. So it's difficult whenever we just have our secondary schools, one of each, basically, you could say, centered up in Franklin. So when you're thinking about new district lines, if you were to travel in your car from the furthest distance in our corporation to the center of Franklin without picking up anyone, and in good weather, you're looking at about 23 minutes. So you add picking up students along the way, there's not a lot. We're still going to have some long routes, but hopefully we can shave some off of those longer routes. A few years ago, we changed our routing so that the K through 6 ride together and 7 through 12 ride together. One thing that's kind of a hidden factor on that is that whenever we bring those students in together, then like the K through 6, they'll come in and then they'll go to the elementary first. So we're sitting at the elementary for approximately 15 minutes. In some cases, a little bit shorter, but 15 minutes is about the normal time to drop off those K through 4 before we travel on to Chester Baker. And we have the same situation at the high school and middle school, where we go to the high school first. We're on the bus approximately 10 minutes before we leave there. And then, you have another 10 minutes travel time to the middle school. And then there's a little bit of downtime at the middle school waiting for buses to arrive in order to dismiss them safely from there. Of course, redistricting will directly impact the routes and the length of the ride time. But those were a couple caveats I wanted to talk about that are sometimes not seen, where parents think that perhaps the student's actually riding or traveling down the road, over an hour, which in reality there's about 15 minutes or so sitting at a building. So, questions?
Thank you. Next slide, please. Any questions about transportation? Please feel free to ask those at this time. Also, Mr. Sewell and Mr. Dickinson, if you could talk to us a little bit about future neighborhoods, and then Doug, also what you're having to do behind the former Kroger building in that area to make things work for us. So, Jeff, you want to start with future neighborhoods?
You bet. So, as Dr. Clendenning mentioned earlier, I've been in touch with and in regular communication with the city planning department, and have started to have that same kind of dialogue with Bargersville. As we look towards redistricting, it's going to be important to recognize where the areas of growth are. And on this diagram, you can see the green areas are subdivisions that are platted and approved and are in construction, or very soon to be in construction. And those are the places where in the most, probably 0 to 3 to 4 year range, we will see those houses in those subdivisions really filling out and being factors in our enrollment in each school district. The blue areas, one is a little bit moving a little bit slower, and then the purple ones are ones that are in kind of more in a conceptual range of longer range planning, not really platted and moving forward in the near term, but also areas of anticipated growth in the community. When you add the short-term properties up, you're in the neighborhood of about 650 new housing starts just in town alone. So lots of opportunity for growth. One of the rules of thumb that kind of gets bantered around is not really a substitute for a good demographic study, but one rule of thumb is 1.5 students for every housing start. So you can see we're somewhere in the range of 900 to 1,000 potential students represented in those growing neighborhoods. If you take half of those and put them in elementary, we may be looking between 400 and 500 new elementary students we'll have to factor into our enrollment and capacity in the coming years. Again, that's something we'll be studying through demographics with experts that are specialized in that, but that just kind of gives you an idea of what that growth means for our corporation.
Yeah,
Mr. Dickinson, you want to talk just a bit about what you have to do, on the inside right now?
Yeah, there in the additions behind Hobby Lobby, we have Deer Meadows, Oak Leaf, and Cumberland Trace and Cumberland Trails. So Deer Meadows was one of the latest additions that they put right in the center of that. And it's right on the line of Northwood and Creekside. And Dr. Clendenning was correct in that our district lines are kind of all mashed in together right there. So last year we had to make some decisions during the year where those students were going to go. And so we kind of drew lines in there to where it made sense for right now. But they're at Deer Meadows, they're adding on. They're well ahead of schedule with the original schedule that the contractor gave me. So they're building in there real quick. So I think we're probably going to have to make some changes in there pretty quick, as well as the Wright property. I'm not sure how far down the pike that is, but I'm sure it will probably be the same developer. which will probably build out pretty fast. So everything's kind of getting jumbled in there. We've been able to do a little bit of transferring between Northwood and Creekside with the way that the bus stops are currently, but it is probably I'll say our fastest growing area at the moment, but there's not a lot of lots left there right now. So.
All right, thank you. There was one question pertaining to programming regarding Cub Care preschool essential skills and developmental programs. Could we move them to other elementary schools and CBALs to help with the per pupil expenditure? Cub Care and the actual preschools do not factor in at all inside of ESSA. It's only developmental delay programming and the essential skills programming that would factor into that. If we remove them out of Creekside, then the disparity between Creekside and Union would grow substantially, and we would not be in violation. We would be in violation of ESSA issues. And Mr. Gross is one thing we didn't talk about, but what would be the potential penalty for us to not make significant shifts with ESSA?
There really is no penalty on the state level. It's just transparency with the taxpayers. But on the federal level, we would be in violation for the federal funds that we receive with title, reduced lunches, etc. So any of those federal grants that we heavily rely on would be in jeopardy.
So the follow-up question is, what was one class per program? Well, we have split Creekside before in essential skills, and we really determined that it was best for the PLC and the best for those kids to kind of be together with those two classes. So we would still like to keep the integrity of that, but on the cost, we could maybe look at shifting that to help maybe only a minor bump in the reduction of per pupil expenditures. That's a possibility. Okay, next slide, please. All right, Mr. Sprout.
Thank you. So this is our entire school district. Obviously, Custer Baker, the middle school and high school are all of these put together. As you go west or to the left, east, obviously Union is the blue. We moved into Creekside. Going way back in history, we actually had Hopewell in that area too. As Creekside came online, Hopewell kind of phased out. The reddish color is Northwood. Something that you'll want to note is that Webb has a little bit of orange at the top. So those students at the very north end of our district actually travel down and end up going to Webb. And as Dr. Clendenning noted earlier, Webb and Needham share a campus. Needham, on the other hand, is the entire, we'll call it purple or pink area. And we are the only school district that goes from the east side of Johnson County to the west. So as Mr. Dickinson takes on transportation, obviously the distance and the time are critical factors. If you want to move on to the next slide, Dr. Clendenning, or I'm sorry. So this is Creekside's territory. Mr. Sewell did some great work on us in getting maximum capacity, our past history on enrollment. Obviously this year we're down. COVID's kind of affected us in every way of life. As you notice at Creekside, these are all the students that go to Creekside. So we cover from the west side of our district, there's students in Union all the way to the very east edge in Needham that all attend Creekside. So right now we have over 500 students across the district that choose to come to Creekside. Doug, would you mind taking a quick insert here? If I'm a parent and I'm interested in my students going to Creekside, what transportation looks like?
Yeah, generally speaking, if you're in the Union area, and you would like for your students to go to Creekside, then you would need to transport. You would need to transport yourself. Now there is a few caveats if we don't, if a student needs a service that's not offered, say at Union, then we'll bring those into Creekside, but it's not a typical bus route. So it's the same way really across the corporation, with the exception of course, Webb and Needham, to where we do have an intra-district transfer bus that goes between those two. Is that what you were looking for, Matt?
Very good. Thank you, Doug. You will, if you do the math, if you get down that granular, the numbers don't add up. There are people that attend each one of our schools that are outside of the scope of this map. So if the numbers don't match, you get out the calculator. There's some reasons for that. The next 4 slides cover the other 4 elementaries. So this is Needham Elementary. And you'll notice even outside of Needham's borders, you'll find this to be the case for every one of our schools. You can scroll through those pretty quick if you want, Jeff. At the very end of this, you will get the opportunity to circle back in this. We're going to provide a link to this presentation. So as we start talking about different schools and the way we do this, you'll have a link so that you can go back to these slides and dive in a little bit deeper. Dr. Clendenning.
All right, thanks. We're getting ready to now shift into 2 breakout rooms that Mrs. Betts has graciously created for us. One, Mr. Sprout will facilitate as we look at 5 maps and we get a chance to do some thinking about Creekside and Northwood boundaries. And then I'm going to take the other breakout room and we're going to talk about Needham and Webb and Union boundaries. A couple things that are outside the scope as we think about these tonight. One is equity. Obviously, in the end, we want equitable schools. We want balance of free and reduced and special education, race, and ethnicity. But tonight, because the way we look at this, we don't have that broken out for you. So we'll draw the lines, and then once we get some ideas and thoughts, we will then take that back and look at those things as we come back to the January 6th meeting to share with this group about what that could look like. Also, we're not really looking at the infrastructure, the roads or the walking paths that could maybe help us with regard to walk zones or future opportunities. And the last one is the link to the school bus route. Now, I will tell you, we do have a school board member on with us tonight, Mrs. Nelson. I saw her just a few minutes ago on my little screen. But one of the things that the board has asked is for us to try to eliminate as many bus routes as possible that exceed 60 minutes. Now, you can see that going back to Doug's slide a second ago, you saw one that was in the 70s. And that has a lot to do with the number of drivers we have and what we have to do to create that route. But we sure would love to get the routes down to 60 minutes. And we do have some ideas and strategies maybe that can help with that. But tonight, we don't want us to think about that. We're gonna let Doug and his think tank think about that once we create some of the structures that we have. Are there any questions about any of the slides that you have previewed so far? All right, I have 7:09. We're gonna spend about 20 minutes. We'll go 25 minutes in our breakout rooms. Mrs. Betts has graciously created those for us. And when we break out, Matt, like I said, will drive on one side, I'll drive on the other. If you get put into a group where you think, oh, I should be looking at the other one, we are going to give everybody a chance to look at all those. So don't feel like, oh man, I want to talk about Creekside's boundaries and I didn't get put in Creekside, or I want to talk about Webb's and I didn't get put in Webb's. We will get to that opportunity to everybody. All right. Mrs. Betts, I believe you can send us to our breakout room. So we'll see everybody back here in about 25 minutes as a large group. All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody. In our group, would Brooke, you want to kind of share what we ended up doing and talking about?
Yes, so we were planning on looking at Union, Webb, and Needham. We did not get to Needham, so we got 2/3 of the way to our goal. So we'll have to pick that up. But on Union, where we kind of started, Dr. Clendening just drew kind of a straight line down center line. And by doing so, we could increase students by about 61, increase the enrollment at Union by 61. And actually the group seemed to think that made sense. That was the general consensus of the group. If somebody disagrees with me, speak up, call me out. Webb, we played around with Webb. We were kind of back and forth. I think we kind of ended on picking up Heritage at Webb. We had played with some different options. I think we ended up, Dr. Clendening, a little over about 400 students in the end in some of the versions that we had, but we did explore a variety of different options in neighborhoods, had some conversation about splitting neighborhoods versus not splitting those neighborhoods. So I think
she's frozen.
I think so too.
Yeah, but those were good summaries. We didn't get to need them, so we will have to come back to that. I think everyone's starting to see how difficult it is as we start moving different neighborhoods and thinking about some of those opportunities. And part of it is, when the city created their planning, they weren't really thinking about our schools. So they put all these neighborhoods close by and different things. And also as the forefathers and mothers of our school district, when we did our planning for elementary schools, we weren't planning for future things either. So we have them kind of all bunched up together, and so it's hard. So we are definitely looking at possibilities. One thing that I am going to do to the people that are in my group, we're going to mock up several more, and I'm going to shoot them to you via email. And if you can just write notes on the things that you liked about what we did for Needham, Webb, and Union, and what you didn't, and send them back, that'll also help us in that debrief side. So Matt, your group.
So our group, you guys scored better on the test than we did. We only batted 50%. We addressed Creekside. We did not get to Northwood. So Northwood and Needham, we'll have to put on the list of to-dos. As for Creekside, similar to you, we went down center line and said, what if we took this many students? You guys shot farther than we did. We only got about 41 students. So depending on where you draw that line, which side of the street it's on and that type of stuff. But that was another idea to try to decrease that. But when we do that, that's only 50 students that we send that way, and Creekside needs more help. So we went to the southern part of Creekside and kind of partitioned it out. And there was some additional gain there, trying to relieve that stress at Creekside. We did not get to Northwood. There was quite a number of great conversations about Union. How do it's a growing area. So is there more we could do out there in conversation to alleviate that growth that we know is coming into Creekside territory?
All right. Anyone that tonight that you had a chance to see our boundaries, and you maybe thought in your head, have you thought about moving this neighborhood or something like that? Just right now to kind of shout out and out loud with the group as we get ready to transition to the next activity. All right. Well, I think what we're going to do now then is I've asked Dr. Warden to kind of summarize, kind of looking ahead where we're going to be in the next couple of meetings, and also some future thoughts that will, I think, help on some of the bus routes, but also help our district over the next several years. So On the mapping, we will send out to your email account. I think we have everybody here's email. If not, we'll get it from the Power School. All of the slides on the mapping that we created. And then we would just ask you if you see a suggestion or you want to draw a line differently, go ahead and like take a snapshot of that, the line you'd like to see. Matt's a maestro. He'll transpose that and get it out to everybody else. And then when we come back on January 6th, we're actually going to start with this activity. We're going to start with the things that we've come up with, like 4 or 5 maps. And we're going to spend the entire night, I think, on the 6th, really drilling down to making sure we have the things that we need. Because on the 27th, what I'd like to do is finalize these with that group. And then we're actually going to take them to the school board meeting in February. That's my goal as an early discussion. We want the community also to weigh in. We know there's going to be some stress. We've had no stress this year at all. So I thought, why not talk about redistricting and go ahead and do some stressful things? So actually, I think we'll be able to make some good sense with everything. So that's where we're headed with the mapping. Dr. Warland.
Yeah, just a couple of other things we wanted to share with the group. This is actually this conversation and the movement we hope to make in the spring semester are a component of the strategic plan that we're currently working on. And many of you know that. You've been with us through the strategic planning journey. So thank you. Thank you for having an open mind tonight. Many of you were willing to kind of play and suggest things and, oh, well, maybe not that, but that's what we need. We need that engagement. So I hope that's ongoing. So again, as Dr. Clendenning said, we're going to come back to this in January. As we come back to this, we're going to continue conversations we mentioned earlier in the district, looking at our free and reduced populations, our English learners. Right now, we have a magnet at Northwood. We're having conversations about what that looks like in the future that is connected to the strategic. Those conversations are part of this overall bigger picture as we think about redistricting. We are also looking at, as Doug mentioned earlier, some of the challenges we're having on the transportation side. And whether you've been around the state of Indiana, even outside of this state, we drove through a state, I don't know, earlier this year, I want to say North Carolina, and a school district we drove by was advertising for bus drivers. So I know that Doug had said in an earlier meeting that the data shows that it's an issue nationwide. So what do we do about that? Our conversation is around a tiered busing system. Doug, you may have mentioned this briefly earlier, but how do we look at a way to efficiently transport students we need less labor in essence. And so is there a way for us to look at a tiered system that will impact start and end times? So that will be a conversation we will be having as part of redistricting as we think forward about the impact at the school. So you're going to hear us also talk about, with regards to start and end times, our PLC structure. It's a critical component of really how we make success happen in Franklin schools, that collaboration, that collegiality, the ability to share assessment and student learning and our data. Really, a lot of it revolves around our data. So that also will factor into that conversation. So as we think about moving forward, there are some additional exciting components of this conversation. We just wanted to, just a little teaser, a little commercial this evening. Dr. Clendenning, have I missed any of the key pieces?
No, well done. On the PLC, the one thing you want to talk about, right now we have, pre-pandemic, we had a separation of times, and we've really talked about the stress of that. You want to go ahead and talk a little about that as well?
Sure. So pre-pandemic, we had our elementaries on a early release. So that's K through 4 was on an early release structure. Late arrival on Wednesdays, again, all of those days were on Wednesdays, existed at our 7 through 12 levels. We're having conversations around the consistency with those collaboration times, it is difficult for us right now to collaborate between 5, 6, and 7, 8 because of those different times. We also have some staffing situations between those two buildings. So we're really trying to look at what's really in the best interest of our students and our families and our faculty. We will continue to value that time. Right now, even today, it's been very apparent in talking with our teachers, and I think even in the way we're delivering hybrid. And I would say, as we prepare for other possibilities, time to collaborate, it's just critical for us to be successful. The other thing I wanted to jump back to, because Jay, I think this actually came up in your question about the time between the buildings, the start times, and how that may not be enough time for some parents. When I referenced that tiered structure, that would be part of that, because Doug actually needs more time in order to deliver the first tier and then go back out. So the gap between those tiers, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, that gap would expand.
Correct. Yeah, right now we don't have enough time to get out, and I mean we can go back through a close neighborhood and pick up a few students, but we don't have near enough time to basically drop off a full busload of students and go out and get another busload like a true 2-tier or 3-tier system is.
I don't know if I missed other questions or not.
Jay, did you have a comment, a question?
Jay, you're muted, buddy.
Jay, you're muted, sir.
Jay, you're still muted. Can others hear him?
Oh, I'm still muted. Sorry.
Oh, there you are. We can hear you.
Oh boy. Okay. And I'm
We've all been there.
But anyways, okay. Yeah, we tried our best to try to do the morning and the evening, pick them up, drop them off type thing. But with CBI being at Creekside, CBIS, and the high school, even though we tried to go Creekside High School back to the CBIS, it just really didn't work, especially in the mornings and trying to get them there in time. The afternoons is a little bit better, but it will also not just help the buses, but also it will help us parents that have more than 2 kids, and especially in 3 different buildings. And that still will be us next year, CBIS, the middle school, and the high school. So, but I'm one of a few in that situation, but I know there's more parents out there with more than 2 kids.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so hopefully today we had 2 objectives. One was to kind of tell you the why behind redistricting and to come up with 3 or 4 models. Well, we didn't get the second one quite accomplished because we got 2 halves finished. But I do believe that the first one was accomplished. But if you have questions about the finance side of life or per pupil expenditure, please reach out to Mrs. Gross. Ms. Gross does a great job of explaining and telling you kind of our journey on the finance side, and also kind of what that could look like. And then on instruction and everything, obviously it's Dr. Warland to talk about, what's it look like on the instructional side. And then you can also reach out to me on all those, but those 2 really lead those 2 areas for us. I want to thank Mr. Dickinson for showing up tonight. He gets up early every day and he's staying really late tonight to help us think about boundaries. And I just want to really tell everybody from the bottom of my heart, thank you to Doug and his team. This year has been really, really hard. We have a dashboard that's on our website, and we keep track of attendance to help us as one of our benchmarks. And if you go to the website and look at transportation, it's been difficult every time. There have only been 9 days in our district this semester where Doug has not had to have stress in getting the drivers and to get the kids and get home. So Doug's done a great job. I know he loses a whole lot of sleep thinking about how do I make this thing happen. But he's amazing, and we really appreciate his team. So Doug, from behalf of everyone in the community, I just want to say thank you very much.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that a lot, and I'll pass that on. But one thing I keep looking at is that once COVID's gone and you come up with some kind of major change, I'll just tell you, well, tell me in 5 minutes before we got to do it, because it'll be, we get through this, and I can't imagine much more being harder than this. So. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And speaking of COVID, I want to thank the parents and the teachers and the administrators for trusting us in this semester. Our goal was threefold: mitigate the virus, create a safe learning environment, and grow kids. It's not been easy, and we've probably, looking at all of those factors, think how's it all fit together? Did it fit together? And we're meeting those. We would love to have every kid back in school every single day. Every single day. I know Dr. Mormon's on here. He was for a little while, and we also have Dr. Jackson, so two outstanding physicians in our area. And I know they're battling every single day for COVID. We're sure trying to get kids in school. I will tell you right now that the goal for the rest of this semester is to stay in school every single day till we get to Christmas. We want that. We would love to be able to get back. We need the virus to go down to get us back to yellow. One thing that Dr. Mormon and has been good locally is to say, I will help you make good decisions. And then when the state kind of threw their big mighty hand down, we were all kind of gifted with that. But I'll give a shout out to Dr. Jackson, who also helped us kind of behind the scenes, because she asked how she could help. And I said, ride up to the state health department and tell them the stress and strain of the color code system, what it's done, because it's not just COVID for the virus, it's also mental health for a lot of kids that we're trying to continue. And it's not been, like I said, and we know it's not perfect. It's not perfect for any kid in the nation. But in Franklin schools, we're sure trying to do things, and we're going to continue to do that to the best of our ability. So we will have a survey coming out to parents probably right after Thanksgiving. Is that right, Dr. W, is what we're thinking?
Yes.
Yeah. And we're just going to ask you, if we have to stay in hybrid for a while, what's the best way to get a day back? And then on the getting kids back, we want to get kids back 5 days a week, full sessions in secondary. Elementary, you've done a great job, as well as CBIS. If we have to go to virtual, I will just tell you right now, it's going to be not having substitute teachers. Carissa Bratcher is up here on our screen. She's with us tonight. She helps us and pulls together all the subs. CBIS was really stressed, and that's why we had to close through the 30th because of the isolations, not because of the virus itself being so over running at that school. But it will be subs that will cause us to go virtual. We'll also, I'm going to use a scalpel, if you will. I'm going to only pull out those schools that need to be pulled out. We're not shutting the entire school system down. Unless it's required that we can't get any subs or something like that. So that's where we are on COVID. We'll continue to work together. Please wear masks. Please stay socially distant. Please wash your hands. And if everybody would do that, then we can have a positive impact and get this thing back down to yellows and blues. And I tell Dr. Mormon all the time, we're one day closer. We are one day closer to that vaccine. And it's going to be here. It's going to get here, and we're going to be able to get back on our feet again and do school the way we want to do school. Anybody else have anything to say before we hang up with 5 minutes to spare? All right. Well,
Thanks for being here, everyone.
Yeah. I know Thanksgiving is going to be different this year, but we're all going to be thankful just being able to have time together. And if you're with your family, even far away on Zoom, it's still a precious time. So thank you for trusting us with your most important commodity, your kids. Thank you, teachers and principals and administrators, for being here. You guys are awesome. And with that, I'll just say good night to everybody.